Hey everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we have a special episode. We have our good friend J. Christopher King, who is the director of the Experiencer Group. He's the co-founder of Inquire Anomalous, and he just newly released an excellent docuseries, Cosmosis, UFOs and the New Reality. And I believe you were the director of that and writer.
I was
Co-writer?
the yeah, I was the director of Cosmosis. It's great to be here, by the way, James. Yes, I directed the series. Uh, Kelly Chase is the main writer of the series, and I helped her out with the writing. It says Kelly Chase with J. Christopher King as the writing credit.
Yeah.
It's very much a creative dialogue between the two of us in a lot of ways, and the very small team of people that we have there. And then we're both credited executive producers along with Jordan Flowers and Teddy Jones. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And so, I mean, that came out and how long has it been? Has it not even been a week yet?
that's
And
right. It came out on Monday,
yeah,
right?
December
Yeah,
30th, and it's already like on some charts, right? It's on Apple TV, like
that's
uh
right. Yeah, right now it's number four in the Apple TV store in terms of like the top 10 TV series. Like right now, the day after it came out, it was number two, and we're like, what the heck? And today it's number four. It's right behind Yellowstone, which is a huge show, and that feels great. And as far as Amazon goes, it's on the charts. It's on the documentary charts. Right now, it's number eight on the documentary charts on Amazon. So it's up there with like The Program and Stephen Greer's Battle for Disclosure and a really great, actually, documentary on mediumship and kind of psychic awareness called Look Into My Eyes. That's number seven. So like we have like it's a really great group of folks and documentaries that we find ourselves in right now. And it's an extraordinary surprise. Like we've hardly done any promotion for it as of yet because it just came out on Monday and we've all been on break and things like this. But the word of mouth has been extraordinary. And to see this kind of response is it's mind blowing. It's truly mind blowing to see the response that we've gotten so far.
yeah, and again, it's called Cosmosis, UFOs and a New Reality, and it's where's it available again?
It's on Apple TV in the United States and Canada, the UK, and Australia. It's also on Amazon Prime in several territories. You can also find it on YouTube, like by paid episodes on YouTube, and also on Google Play right now. And currently, we're working on um, some distribution so that it'll be in many, many other countries towards the end of this month, God willing. Fingers crossed, but it looks good. It looks like it's going to happen. So I'm psyched. Yeah.
Yeah, and you guys really did a lot with this docuseries. And speaking of word of mouth, I no conflict here, but I've heard people say that it was better than the program. Just putting that out there.
Well, I mean,
No, I know.
if
I'm not
even
trying to.
if people are even comparing like what I did directing this with James Fox and his amazing work over decades, like that's absolutely amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Regardless of whether I come in under or like whatever, if people are even having like putting my name in the same conversation with such an incredible name like James Fox, that means a lot to me. I really
yeah, no,
appreciate it.
but really, both. I mean, they complement each other. You have James Fox, and he's focusing on the program. He's putting out the idea that there is such a program that exists. Um, I mean, I think that's good generally. But then comes next, I think Cosmosis is like, okay, well, what the hell is this really all about? And I think you guys did a excellent job contributing substance and inquiry and insight and like a very deep aspect into the UFO phenomenon, but also anomalous experiences and everything that kind of gets, you know, that converges around that. Again, and you guys get into that into the series where, okay, wow, we have UFOs. Yeah, UFOs are real, but what's next, right? Like, what does it
Mm-hmm.
mean? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and what even is the real conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Again, we could do an episode or interview covering each episode. I mean, there's
They're really dense. They're dense
yeah.
episodes, man. Yeah,
No,
for
but
sure.
also it's I mean, I'm kind of enmeshed in all this stuff, but it didn't feel like it was too much, right? Like I would recommend everybody rewatching each episode, definitely, because even for me, I watched it. I went through a few times, and like I had to go back and pick up on different details of like what's going on here in this episode, because there's all the different aspects to it. And with all that said, where were you coming from when you created Cosmosis? Like, what were you trying to communicate?
Sure. Okay, so from a creative standpoint, Kelly Chase of the UFO Rabbit Hole podcast, and I, we're really trying to figure out like what, where are we headed? Where are we headed with the conversation around the paranormal and the UFO phenomenon and the phenomenon writ large? Like, there have been a lot of documentaries that really focus on the nuts and bolts aspects and don't really focus on the experiencers and have often kind of shaved off inconvenient details with respect to what people actually report in situations like this, partially maybe because of this pressure that, of a romanticized notion about what's really going on here. And like, if what's really going on here or what people want to have going on here is just, a craft that people see way up in the sky, and like maybe it's from somewhere else, maybe we don't know where it's from, then there are huge boats full, like an armada of documentary projects that really kind of speak to that. But then from me, as director of the experiencer group, I see that there are a lot of overlapping phenomenon. And so there are a lot of situations where people will experience non-human intelligence from the perspective of a UFO encounter, but then they'll also experience mediumship or precognitive dreams or out of body experiences or near death experiences. And many of the prominent UFO witnesses, UFO experiencers that we have on record that are part of really the historical discourse within this field have experienced other aspects of anomalous phenomenon. And and it's been shaved away from the discourse. And so really we wanted to look at like what does this mean for the nature of us as human beings? Like what can we perceive? What does this mean for the nature of our reality? What does this mean for the nature of our consciousness? What does this mean for our history? And are there aspects of the cover up and many other aspects around that cover up that, like, what are they really trying to hide? And is it possible that they're not just trying to hide aspects of non-human intelligence, but aspects of human potential and like what we can perceive? And what would that really mean for the future of humanity at large? Does that make
Yeah,
sense? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I can't even you know, part of my like the engaging the phenomenon. I guess you can call it branding, right? I don't think of it like that. Uh, but like even on my Twitter background, it says awakening human potential through UAP and consciousness studies, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, because I love that, obviously being an experiencer personally, but you know after having an experience, and I loved how you guys communicated this with Courtney, who his story has never really been told, and you featured it here in the first episode, and it was a very fresh perspective, but it speaks to all the other high strangeness that you're talking about, and the human potential, and the inconvenient um, elements of the stories that come out that are usually marginalized because people, and I get it, right? They're trying to just like get people to say, hey, there's something here. But in
Hmm.
order for people to swallow that, you have to kind of, for many decades at least, they just shut everything else down because it was too much for
Hmm.
people. And I don't think that's any longer the case, really. I mean, not to say that it ever was, like, who's to say?
Hmm.
But I think now more than ever, again, you have this catch 22 of the UFO subject being taken seriously. But with that, you have the official narrative of what is still the acceptable discourse on UFOs. Uh, so it's a catch 22 because you have both of those things simultaneously.
For
Um,
sure.
but the again, tell us a little bit about how you came about Courtney and his story and how that made it into the first episode.
Oh, sure. Okay. So Courtney, a really profound experiencer. He shows up in episode 1 and in episode 3 of Cosmosis. And he was actually one of the first avid listeners of the UFO Rabbit Hole, Kelly Chase's podcast, that reached out to her in the early days in the first episodes of her podcast. And he was like, I really think you're right on the money, you're headed in the right direction. He was very supportive and things like that. And over the course of time, she began to understand that he was an experiencer himself. And kind of later in that journey, um, she opened the conversation to me in terms of what his story was, what his family story was, and he was interested in. He found out that we were working on this documentary series, and so we'd actually started shooting the documentary before he was even going to be involved in it in terms of like being on camera and things like that. And as that kind of evolved, we were just kind of talking to him a lot, both Kelly and I, and just saying like, just not really wanting to push him to do it because like people have to figure out on their own timelines, like whether or not it's right for them to do anything like this. Like Courtney's a private wealth manager. Like he handles a lot of money for investors. He makes money for people, and like that's the kind of job that is especially delicate. That kind of position is especially delicate, when it comes to anomalous experience. There are a lot of gigs where it's like if you're like a Reiki healer, or if you're an
Yeah.
acupuncturist, like
Yeah, right,
being an
right.
experiencer, no problem. If
Yeah.
you're a lawyer, if you're an engineer, you're a doctor, you're a surgeon, you're managing somebody's money. If you're in insurance, like there are a whole host of gigs that like it's a lot harder. But he felt a real calling to like talk about this stuff, and he has in his family history, like he has a long line of folks that have had anomalous experiences, especially with regard to precognition and remote viewing and mediumship, but also UFO sightings and ghosts and poltergeists and apparitions and all manner of other things. And so he seemed like kind of exactly the right person to really focus on in a show like this because he has so much experience with the range of anomalous inquiry, and so does so do other people in his family structure. His grandmother, his great grandfather, his son, like so many other people in his family structure. And they kind of take it as a given. Like they've been open about it amongst each other for so many years that it's kind of like this strange open secret that's brought them together as a family and is like shown more to each other as a family. Like it's a point of pride and togetherness for them as a family group. I don't want to speak for Courtney, but like I think it's incredible having gotten to know his mother and his grandmother and his sons and his wife and everybody else in the family structure, going out and hanging out on his paranormal ranch down in East Texas. Like it's humbling, man. Like seeing that there are other families. He's kind of like in a very different way. There's been a lot of focus within the community, within the UFO community, on people like Chris Bledsoe and his family. And Courtney's story is in some ways not so different. Like especially if you start kind of like getting into it with him about what else has been going on, and that would kind of point to the idea that maybe there are other families out there that have been kind of quiet about this stuff. There probably are. I mean,
No, yeah, there
right?
most
Yeah.
certainly are, right?
Right. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
we know, yeah. Um, yeah, so I mean, I love how, obviously the UFO aspect is there, but I think it really communicates to the audience. I mean, at least it did for me, and I was able to relate to it that, it's so much more than just than a UFO. It's so much more than just, hey, there's this object out there that's like metal and there's beings in there, and like, yeah, maybe that's a part of it for sure, but it's really way more than that. And I loved how that was communicated in the throughout the entire series. And even in the first episode, you take people right into the deep, and you guys aren't even saying, hey, well, this is probably extraterrestrials. Like right from the first episode, you guys are getting into the different potentialities of non-human intelligence, and you guys didn't dumb down the conversation at all. And I think especially people just coming into this now after like the 2017 revelation, the news cycles of UAP, it's no longer strange to have a headline that talks about crash retrievals and off-world vehicles, and that's kind of like in consensus reality now,
Hmm.
mainstream. Uh, so I think it's all right to go right into that aspect of non-human intelligence and the different potentials, because the idea of like UFOs being a reality, I mean, more or less that's kind of been established by now, one way or another, right? Uh, there's still the questions of like who's hiding what, and what's the real truth about it, and what part of the cover up is, what is actually being hidden, and who's hiding
Mm.
it. Like there's still that kind of squandering and
Hmm.
misdirection and what have you. But
Absolutely.
but the deeper aspects of the conversation of some of the different potential of what are some of these non-human intelligences, um, and with that, if you want to talk a little bit about who participated in that part of the conversation and added what kind of context.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thanks, James. You know, Kelly and I think a lot of it was just recognizing that, nothing against other shows. There's just so much pressure. And especially if you're dealing with a network or, executive producers that are really not in the kind of UFO space, that there is this element of like trying to make something palatable for the public. And the reality is that, as you and I and many of your listeners will know, there are more than one hypothesis for where these beings come from, regardless of whether we're talking about the Greys, the Nordics, the insectulins or mantids or like orbs, many other, the grand ecology of what we're dealing with here. There are a lot of hypotheses about where these are coming from, and whether it's purely extraterrestrial or whether we're dealing with time travelers, the extra tempestrial hypothesis, which in our show, we bring in Mike Masters, who's like the guy to talk to about the time travel hypothesis. An incredible, incredible guy. He's actually flying into town this week. I'm really excited. We're going to be hanging out with him this
Yeah.
week. He's coming into town to promote the show a little bit, and really looking forward to that. I love Mike Masters. Hanging out with Mike is the best. But like Mike really he's written several books about the extratempestrial hypothesis, and he makes a lot of great points. He's a biological anthropologist. He's exactly the guy that you want to hear about this from. And he's just like, look, they look so much like us, you know and what's the likelihood of that? And the reality is that we don't know what the likelihood of that is, because we've barely scratched the surface when it comes to exploring other planets and like knowing what life could be like on other planets. But he does bring up a great point, which is just like, okay, like we see these beings and they have like two eyes on their heads. They got two arms, they've got, two hands, 2 feet, two legs, and and their size is not so different from us. Like, and recognizing that if our biology continues to evolve in the way that it does, then he contends that our jaws will continue to kind of like push back, and that our heads will continue to expand, and we will likely look more like these gray beings over the course of thousands and thousands of years. And so he contends like these are very, very likely time travelers. Then there are other hypotheses like the ultra terrestrial hypothesis, and we get Greg Bishop, for example, to talk about that a little bit, and Joshua Cutchin kind of speaks to it a little bit as well, which is the idea, the ultra terrestrial and crypto terrestrial hypothesis that there's essentially some kind of hidden realm, or that like we could be cohabitating on this earth with other beings. Um, and that could be like under the oceans, it could be in caves, it could be in something that we're not anticipating within the biome, or what like Eric Davis has talked about as the shadow biome, right? And so we really get into that a little bit and talk about Tim Gallaudet's recent white paper from the Soul Foundation that was talking about kind of sightings of non-human intelligence underwater. And there's some great stuff there that I really love to see. I mean, that's for me, that's kind of like, and Kelly as well. That's a favorite hypothesis, like I love Hal Puthoff's ultra terrestrial paper. I remember one of the first times that you and I hung out, we were talking about Hal Puthoff's ultra terrestrials paper, and kind of like geeking out about it a lot.
Yeah.
And there's a lot there. And then we look also at the interdimensional hypothesis as well. And one of the things here is just that like there are so many shows they've never really dealt with the range of possibilities. And it's because there's been pressure to just like keep on this idea of aliens from other planets. And there's great other hypotheses going on that could be very relatable to the public. And being able to kind of the open up the range of possibilities for what's going on here, and being able to really open up just talking about how much we don't know and how much we want to know, and like not siphoning the conversation off to, beliefs and suppositions, as Whitley Strieber puts it in our show, I think is incredibly important. And so, a lot of the spirit of the show is based around keeping an open mind and really giving frameworks for people to think about these things in a more expansive way.
Yeah. And I think, when you open the possibility for those kind of different potentials, you're also kind of increasing the probability, right, of the whole thing to begin with as well. So, I, I hope, um, for a lot of people, I think that's the first time they're going to be hearing about all those different kind of theories. Like, if they're just going on to like Amazon Prime or Apple TV and they're like, oh, what's Cosmosis? And they think, oh man, this is, oh, UFOs, right? I get it. And then they're brought into this conversation like, holy shit. Like you're
That's
bringing, and rightfully so, with the episode title, the UFO rabbit hole. You're
mm-hmm,
kind of bringing them in. But then, noticeably in the second episode, there's definitely a shift in the conversation.
mm,
And the episode is called Hidden Potentials, but you focus on, I guess we can say, start with the Paul Benowitz
mm-hmm.
piece is featured in there. So why do you think it was important to include that part of the conversation in Cosmosis?
Sure. So the Paul Benowitz case, for those in the audience that don't know, um, the best research that we have on the Paul Benowitz case definitely comes through Greg Bishop in his incredibly important book, Project Beta. Greg Bishop, a really underknown, um, you could say undervalued, and incredibly brilliant researcher within the field. Um, he kind of took a step back for a few years in recent years, and so a lot of people that have really just joined the field within the past few years don't really know his work and why it's so important, as much as those of us that have been around for a little bit. But we were really really happy to bring him back with his show, um, because his work's so damn important and it's so relevant. Project Beta is essentially, largely speaking, about the case of Paul Benowitz, who lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he lived near an Air Force base, and he saw anomalous aircraft uh, right near his house. And they seemed to be exhibiting characteristics that he thought looked more like UFOs than traditional aircraft. And so, being a good citizen, he reached out to the Air Force Base about it because he thought that there might be UFOs like scouting the base rather than them being experimental aircraft or something along those lines. And the thing is that instead of dissuading him and saying like, "Oh, that's just ours," or like, "Don't worry about it," or anything like that, they really started to dialogue with him and set up situations for him to meet other people around that Air Force base that were involved in national security, that started to feed him, lore, stories about what may be happening there. And, he came to think that like there might be an alien invasion happening. And so he got fed information and he even got given a computer,
Who
right?
gave him,
He had
do we remember who gave him the computer?
I'm not sure if it was somebody from the NSA or if it was
So
Richard Doty himself. Like,
one of the parts of the lore is that he was actually given that computer by Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Uh,
mm,
I don't know
mm-hmm.
how thoroughly that's been confirmed, but that's part of the conversation for sure.
I love that idea, and that would be like a huge wrinkle in the conversation if he got that computer from J. Allen Hynek himself, because that computer was wired to a receiver, and he was supposedly getting these communications from off-world entities. And we actually have some graphics in the show that show dot matrix printouts from those messages, from Greg's book Project Beta. And it was all fabrications. It was all being fed to him, and the fact that this stuff happens, that so much money is spent on secrecy. There are a lot of projects now we know within the national security state, within the military and things like this. And it can be understandable, like we're like under the auspices of keeping us safe, what have you, that there will be a program, and then the budget for security around a program can actually be 6 to 7 times the budget of the program itself to keep it secret.
Yeah.
And some of that secrecy can be built around things like this situation, the Paul Benowitz situation, lying to people, creating confabulations, like letting people think things that aren't true to like further that line of inquiry or for further those beliefs, so that people don't really see what's going on. And um and that can be somewhat understandable. I mean, you know, one of the things here is that there's all this push for transparency, which is incredibly understandable. This push for disclosure, it's incredibly understandable. And we want to know what the hell is going on. And at the same time, there's the very understandable situation where some of the people that we're looking to for answers are, they're from the intelligence community, they're from the military, and in some situations these are people that literally can't tell us what's going on, and so they'll say like, oh, I can't say this, I can't say that. And then in other situations they are obligated to lie to us, they're obligated to lie to us. And
Yeah.
like, the reality of that is that like it's understandable in a lot of ways, because they can't, you know, we can't let, or the idea is that we can't let Russia or China know our capabilities, or we can't know other nation states that threaten us know what we've really got going on. And so they can't just hold a meeting in a skiff with every single, you know, citizen of the United States. They can't bring 286 million people or whatever it is right now into a skiff and say like, okay, pinky swear you're not going to tell Russia or China or anybody. This is what's going on. And then after you leave here, we're all going to be quiet about it and it'll be fine. Right. And so there's that idea that like, you know, you, if anybody tells us what's going on, it's also going to just be, you know, an open situation to other folks. Right. And that's, it's one of the aspects where it's just like, I think many of us wish that we need to acclimate to that level of the conversation. It's 2025, things are only getting more serious. Like there's these drone incursions, like there's a bunch of what seem like psyops even around the drone incursions happening even just in recent days. There are the congressional hearings, and there's a lot of there's a lot of back and forth about how, you know, constructive those congressional hearings have actually been, you know, especially the most recent one. There's a lot of talk about like, what is Arrow really doing, and are they really continuing in the kind of explaining it away construct that Project Blue Book and Grudge and others have done in the past. And there's an aspect where it seems like we really need to level up the conversation, at least in terms of ufology, to acclimate to the greater understanding of the general world that we get lied to by these people. And for some reason, like everybody else in the world understands this except for people that are interested in UFOs. Like like UFO people used to be the people that saw behind the curtain. And for
Yeah.
whatever reason, over the course of the last 10 years, we've been hoodwinked. We've been hoodwinked as a community into believing that we should listen to these people and we should listen to everything that they say with regard to this stuff. And it's a lie. It's an absolute lie. And it's a lie under the auspices of national security. It's an honorable lie in a lot of ways, or it can be understood to be that. But it is that. And like, let's grow up. Let's be adults. Let's think about this stuff. Let's really see what's going on here. And it can actually make us feel less crazy or less anxious or less conflicted to recognize that, you know, the situation is that we live under a national security state that is built on obfuscation. It's built on non-transparency. And if we're going to get to some of these answers, we need to look to alternative situations other than the national security state to have them.
Yeah, and I think, with part of that is, you have to be able to have the conversation without being decisive. If and when possible, because then people just build camps around different personalities. And I mean, rather than doing that, yeah, acknowledge it for what it is, but then also state the facts for what they are, um, at least to begin with, right? Because, people need to acknowledge, right? Like, I'm just going to say this as an example. I don't know the truth about this, right? But just say they put out the Bob Lazar thing. It was an intentional psyop because they wanted Soviet Union, Russia, China, whoever, to think, oh, that's how the propulsion works, and like the sleight of hand thing, where it has, they're actually it's just trying to obfuscate how the technology works, and it really has nothing to do with us as Americans, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling American citizens the truth or disclosure, but to prevent them from making breakthroughs, because or you know, similar to the Majestic papers, right? Where the actual Majestic papers are called the ones that made it out to the public are called second generation, and they were based on real papers. And you can I'm saying all this allegedly, right?
Of
Example.
course.
Um, and the real papers actually exist, but the secondary papers were made to catch out moles in the program, but that's what made it out. So there are legitimate aspects to those papers, but it's still it may the UFO community was utilized, but it we weren't necessarily the target audience, but we were a kind of casualty in that sense, and we're fighting over it. But in the manuals and everything, and when they're talking about the technology now, Soviet Union's trying to say, oh, maybe that's how it works, right? Um, or they were trying to find people within the program that were giving information away and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so complex that
It is.
they did, you know, Greg Bishop did an excellent job with Project Beta, right? And that's, you know, good on him. And but that's only like 1% of the conversation. They
Exactly.
they did Mirage
Exactly.
Men,
Mm-hmm.
and that definitely borrowed like a ton from Greg's work, for better or worse. But
Mm-hmm.
I did appreciate that the Mirage Men kind of continuation, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak,
Mm-hmm.
where they got into different aspects of the disinformation, targeted individuals,
Mm-hmm.
um, and again, things that Jacques Vallée has said, which is like, what? Right? Like, Jacques Vallée was on Jeffrey Mishlove in like the late 70s or something, and he's talking about how there are hoaxes being done, where it's a staged UFO event.
Mm-hmm.
But himself and the scientists that he was working with concluded that it wasn't a hoax by the witness, and it wasn't necessarily genuine anomalous UFO non-human intelligence phenomenon, but it was some kind of other human actor state, whatever you want to call it, um, conducting staged abductions for whatever, there's a whole conversation that can be based around that. That's a whole documentary in itself. I mean, that you could have a whole
Yeah,
series of books or
absolutely.
discussions around that. And I,
Absolutely. And it's challenging because, going there for a minute, it's a hot button issue. I believe that those documents exist. I believe, like, I even have a reasonable understanding of where they probably are right now. And you know, they've been weaponized, like those documents have been weaponized by some people to suggest that like non-human intelligence abductions don't happen or something like that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and the reality of the situation is much more complex than that, you know. And what it looks like a lot is that there is a strong history of overlap between people that are looking at the UFO phenomenon and then people that are interested in subjects like MK Ultra, and like how do we manipulate the mind, and like how do we perform enhanced interrogations on individuals, and like where do we do that, and like we can't necessarily do that in the United States because there are certain laws about that. So do we go to other countries to do that? Do we go to off-site situations in Cuba or South America, for example, and do it there, right?
Yeah,
And
Jacques Vallée, yeah, he had the in volume 4 of Forbidden Science, he says exactly that. He has the document, in Jacques Vallée's words regarding Brazil and Argentina.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are other people in the community, like contemporary people in the community and going back years, that have like a decent paper trail about what this stuff is, and like it's very hot. It's not the kind of stuff you can talk about on a public podcast and not have to look over your shoulder sometimes, and
Yeah.
for very good reason, like when like Lou Elizondo talks about somber or something like that, people have speculated about that for years. And one of the decent interpretations there is that like people have been throwing a lot of challenging material into the UFO cover up for decades. And a lot of it, as Greg Bishop says in our show, and he says in Project Beta, and other people have said elsewhere, some of this stuff has absolutely nothing to do with flying saucers. It has nothing to do with the Greys. It has nothing to do with traditional, if you were able to be calling it that, abductions and other situations like that. But it has a lot to do with human experimentation and human potential. And it's a very, very inconvenient situation. It's something that is going to be very hard for people to deal with, but it absolutely seems to be the situation.
Yeah, and I hope that we'll hear more about that, and it could be brought to the table as part of the conversation, because it's equally important. Um, because again, even if they're just using UFOs as a cover for that, there are correlations in different ways, right? Um, I mean, it's all on slide 9, right? It says it right there in slide 9. It's talking about UAP, but like in the headline or under it somewhere in like the fine print, it says that we already have and we've been experimenting with these capabilities
Right,
already. So, and
right.
this is just the icing on the cake is how can you augment that technology? But you know, I guess, for one last part of this somber aspect of the conversation,
Mhm,
I mean, I could just on what you're saying about the traditional abduction versus some of this. I mean, that's a whole conversation that I wish we could have right now, but we just don't have the time for.
mhm,
Um, but the narrative. So, I mean, you're the director of the experiencer group, right?
mhm,
I'm just like a kind of random person, but here we have engaging the phenomenon where, interactions is kind of an aspect of the UFO phenomenon, and experiences and the realization and insights thereof, which are kind of the deeper aspects. But, what do we do in a world where, the narrative is what's making the news cycle and it's garnering the attention, but we are trying to have a more deep and thorough conversation at the same time and bring the public up to speed.
You mean like how do we bring the public up to speed? Is that
Yeah.
what you mean?
Yeah, and the
Yeah,
deeper aspect. I mean, I guess that's kind of part of what you're doing with Cosmosis.
it is. And like, I mean, and I think that that came through a lot of deliberation and questioning. And um, I didn't really, in some ways, I didn't really want to, and it wasn't something that I didn't really love the idea of spending so much time on this show, given that like I have so many obligations with the experiencer group. And it really kind of put me in a situation where, it became sometimes hard to like keep doing support groups and keep managing the experiencer group while doing this documentary series. And at the same time, it felt like the most important thing that we could do, because what else can we do? Like policy papers, like trying to feed things through the government or whatever. Like there's so many games that are played in that way. If and it seemed like really getting to the people themselves and being able to fund it independently without having anybody kind of interrupt and intercede in the conversation, and being able to talk to people directly seemed like the most important, most significant, and most helpful way to go about this, for myself and for Kelly and for Jordan and for others that are involved in the project. And you're involved in the project. I mean, like, you're a talking head in the show, and it's your TV debut, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Like you've got a couple projects coming up, but like it's so cool that like I'm really I'm really dang proud that like you're in the show. I think you're in every episode,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's so cool to see what you contributed here. And we shot it right here.
Yeah.
Like your
Yeah.
chair was like right over here, when we were shooting that. And I it's just so cool to see like what's able to be possible through independent financing, and really trying to like come up with something so that we could have those deeper conversations, and to bring fresh voices into the conversations, like yourself, or like Daniel Elizondo, or like Courtney, or many other people, that or Robin Lasseter, or other people that are involved in the show that have never shown up on television before, but have a lot of really important, deep, nuanced uh, contributions to make to the conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, I love James Madden, his aspects, his contribution, a great,
Absolutely.
fresh, new, very deeply insightful voice. He makes up so many great points. And he has a great voice for TV. Damn.
He
Yeah.
does. He's got a great head too. He already
Yeah.
looks like he's on Mount Rushmore, and
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah. It was
yeah.
great having him in there, and the philosophical, but very kind of real implications, right? Um,
Hmm.
were there any parts, was there anything that you just couldn't make it into the final cut, so to speak?
Oh man, yeah, absolutely. There were like whole situations. There are so many stories. Like there are incredible experiencer stories that we couldn't get into the final cut, just because of time, because of the stories that were, or kind of like the avenues and the segments and the segues that we were taking, and how much time it would take to bring those stories in. And there are other folks um, that we shot with, that like we shot with Keith Taylor. Keith Taylor's amazing.
Oh, yeah, Yeah.
like I love Keith Taylor so much. Like he's an incredible resource. You know, he's in law enforcement. He's such a great voice, and he's such an advocate for people being able to report. And he's been involved with UAP Med and many other situations like that. And I did a great interview with him um, a couple days after like our Inquire Anomalous conference in December of 2023, I guess it was now.
It's like
And
I'm losing time here. Yeah.
it's crazy, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But like you know, it was a great interview. It was amazing. And like I love Keith's work. And like at the end of the day, like given just where we were weaving with the story, we couldn't throw it in there. And like and there's so much that he had to say, but like there are so many other stories from other folks, even from the people that we hear from a lot, like yourself and
Yeah.
Mike Masters and Diana
And
Pasalka
not
and
for nothing,
Whitley.
I would have loved to seen like an episode threading your story as well.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate that.
You know, like really,
But like,
I hope so.
yeah, but you know, like we've been really talking about it, Kelly, me, Jordan, others, that like you know, kind of like Ancient Aliens and like all these other programs in a different way, you make a bank, you know, you have a bank of this material and then you can draw from it in the future as well. And so we're really hopeful and we have some things that we're looking at, some vehicles that we're looking at for the future where we can start to kind of roll out some of those stories and some of those extras and some of the other stuff that comes out so that it could come out either in future seasons of the show or it could come out elsewhere as well. And I'm really looking forward to that because there's so much richness there. And, you know, for every interview that we did and for everybody that we talked to on the show, you only maybe see like 5% of like what they really contributed, and we'd like to really show the true contribution of what people have made to the show for sure.
Yeah. Wow. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to see some different aspects if you guys do future segments or however that comes out. I have a ton of ideas that
Yeah,
you know
yeah, yeah.
I'll kick
I'd love to
around.
hear them. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
We'll talk about it offline. Right.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Sounds good.
Um, but so what's next right now with Cosmosis?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean it just came out this week,
Yeah, I
so
know,
right
right?
now
Yeah,
I'm
it's
like
like
um but for the next couple months we're going to be promoting Cosmosis. Kelly and I we're going to be going on shows like yours, you know, going in other places just to really continue the conversation and really try to raise awareness for these deeper, more thorough conversations that aren't dumbed down and and really trying to take the ball further down the field in the best way that we can. Because, you know, one of the points that we're really trying to make in the show is that grassroots efforts are incredibly important. And, you know, there's all sorts of those. There's, you know, like what Keith is doing within law enforcement and trying to like open up, you know, the stigma with reporting UFO and UAP sightings, like with the recent, you know, Jersey drones situation that is still happening. You know, it's important for people to be able to report situations like that to law enforcement, and for people not to be treated like they're crazy. And people like Keith do a great job of that. There's the UAPDF, UAP Disclosure Fund, you know, that Jordan and Lester Nare and Matt Ford and other people are involved with. And you know they're trying to do good work to get the ball down the field. A lot of people are trying to do great grassroots efforts and making headway that way. And the reality is that like so much of this conversation around UAPs and UFOs for decades has been, as much as it's been kind of a rogue or kind of independent effort among many different people over decades, there's also been a relative conformity about what that conversation is,
Right. Yeah.
within certain parameters and things like that. And so, in a way, like in many ways, like these grassroots efforts are incredibly important because, like, attacking this problem and really looking at this from a range of solutions, from a range of perspectives and a range of backgrounds is probably the best way that we can do it, you know because the reality is like this phenomena happens to everybody and happens to everybody around the world, and people report so many aspects of this, not just craft in the sky, but like communication from non-human intelligence or other more high strangeness experiences. And they've been going back centuries. And there's been a lack of transparency and a lack of forthrightness on the part of world governments. And part of it seems to be based around the idea that, like, there's a lot within human potential that it only benefits the powers that be if they're ignored, if those powers are ignored, or if that potential is ignored, or the edges of our perception are ignored, or the possibilities of a reality beyond our current power structures as they are, like those need to be ignored. And so that kind of push pull, and really depending on the powers that be to articulate that clearly and effectively in a short amount of time, within the next couple of years or something like that, it really starts to stretch it starts to stretch credulity in a lot of ways. I mean, I was at the first Soul Foundation conference, um, and I was sitting next to Kelly. Kelly was on my right, and Jordan was on my left. It was like on talk clips, on talk clips, on talk clips. And we were watching Carl Nell's presentation. He brought up that infamous slide, and it showed, like, you know a kind of 20-25 year plan for disclosure. And what it was, the date that it had then was, I think it was October 1st, 2030, for like what's the actual like disclosure day, right?
Yeah.
And it was a floating day. And so we have this understanding, and like this is a very methodical person, and we were in a very private situation at the time. And somebody leaked that slide early, and there was a lot of kind of hubbub about that, and then it came through with the release of those videos. But like, I don't think that it's really a secret anymore that there are a lot of people that are trying to figure out and trying to contend with, how do we drag this out in such a way that it's responsible and that we can like see the results as we're dripping this information out, and dealing with the fallout as it happens, right? And so it's like, we'll drag it out for, people are saying like, we'll drag it out for 20 years if it'll mean that we won't have chaos, in the interim. And in a lot of ways that makes sense. It makes sense to try to do this in a responsible way for people like Carl now and other people like that. And then you and I and others know experiencers that are probably getting towards the end of their lives, right? And they don't want to die without an acknowledgement that they weren't crazy. They want to hear that acknowledgement because, like, it'll mean something to them, and what they can point to their husbands or their wives or their children or their bosses, or their neighbors, or all these other folks,
Even to
e-
themselves.
even to themselves. Absolutely. Especially to themselves. And it's hard, right? It's hard. I can understand the responsibility of the people that feel like they're in the driver's seat in that kind of a situation. And then at the same time, it's like, are they really in the driver's seat? Are they really going to be able to deliver in with the timeline that they want to deliver things in? And like, do we have enough time as a culture to wait for that? There's a lot of situations, here we are, we're going into 2025 and things are just getting weirder and wilder and crazier by the day
Yeah.
in so many ways, and it's like, do we have 20 years?
Yeah.
Do like, what do we have 20 years for anymore anyway? you know and like maybe we need to grow up a little bit faster. Like maybe the only way that we can survive is to grow up a little bit faster.
Yeah, and I mean that weight is also, considering that there's already been 80 years of wait, let's just wait, let's just wait, let's just wait. Who's to say that it just won't get prolonged by the next people who step in and just shut it down?
Hmm.
Like while you have the opportunity, while you're ahead, just do it while you can, because maybe you and a few of your comrades pass away or something unfortunate happens and you can no longer be involved in the effort and it just gets shut down again, like it did in
Hmm.
the late 80s and early 90s, when there was again, alleged attempts to actually do it. Um, but again, yeah, I think that this idea that it can be controlled is also a little silly in a sense. I mean, just again, kind of in correlation to Cosmosis, right? I'm going to call it now Cosmosis, taking the conversation back. Um, is that you have something like the telepathy tapes came out, right?
Hmm.
And it is like
Hmm.
mind blowing. It's human
Incredible.
potential and it's like grassroots
Hmm.
and like people are freaking interested, dude. Like they're ready.
Hmm.
It jumped up to like number one, and I mean that tells you something about where people's heads minds are at, right?
Yeah, I love the telepathy tapes. Yeah, I know Kai and I know Jen, the two producers of the telepathy tapes, and like they do such great work. Like what they're doing right now is so amazing. And like I love that it's something that nobody was anticipating,
Right.
but it was like a story that was right there
The whole, yeah,
for
yeah,
people that were like willing to listen and willing to engage. And for anybody in your audience now or in the future that hasn't, I'm sure in the future it'll be less of an issue, but
yeah,
like telepathy tapes absolutely worth the listen. And like I love, in the first few episodes, Kai and Jin, it's kind of slow, it's kind of a slow pace, there's a lot of proving kind of basic parameters around these non-speaking autistic people having telepathic capabilities with their loved ones or people right around them and others. And um and at first, being somebody that, in the language of Jeff Kripal, like I'm already flipped. You're already
yeah,
flipped, right?
yeah,
Like to people like us, like that are already like very aware of the anomalous. Um, it took me a minute to listen to those first three episodes and kind of be like, okay, all right, I
yeah,
know that we're building somewhere. I know
right,
that we're
yeah,
building somewhere. But then to see not just like where they were able to go with the story, but also to recognize like what the public response has been to it, like
right,
this
yeah,
the structure of it and like building it slowly and thoroughly. It was really, really, it's been really smartly done, and I really take my hat off to them, like Kai and Jen and all of the families that are involved with that, and Dr. Diane and everybody else that's been involved with that project. um so much bravery, so much courage, so much honesty, and I love it. I think it's incredible. And like it's just a privilege to hear it. It's a privilege that it's to, I think, the human population that like that this story is starting to get out there now. And I think it's amazing that these are approachable, real people that have been working independently at something that they saw was true and honest and real, and they just like pursued it. And what more could you want? I mean, the level of authenticity there is so palpable. And it's like why your show is so good. Like the way that it's independent, and the way that it's like, with the telepathy tapes, the way that it's wonky, and then it kind of sounds a little bit like a local PBS station or something
Yeah.
like that in the episodes and stuff like that. It serves it well because it makes you know that these are real people trying to make a real thing, you know? And at the end of the day, I try to make an excuse for myself with Cosmosis that way, where it's like we had a very small budget,
Yeah.
like our whole
Yeah.
season is less than the budget of a single episode of Ancient Aliens. And we just like tried to do the most that we possibly could with it. And it's still a little bit wonky. There's still some rough edges in there and whatnot, but like we were trying to tell this best story that we could with the money that we had. And I think, what we're seeing right now is that like people respond to that kind of authenticity. They don't need everything to be slick. They just need things to come from an authentic place, more often than not. And they'll respond to that. And I love that.
Yeah. And again, just the way that the public is responding to, say, Cosmosis and the telepathy tapes, and it's only going more and more. It's not like you know, something that's like fizzling out so quick. I mean, I think it's just really, people are really are just, I think they've had it with the bullshit pretty much. I mean, of course we have, right? But like I
Yeah.
think the general public is kind of like at the point where like it's so obvious now. And like how can you take anything negative away from these projects, right? Like Cosmosis or the telepathy tapes. Like how can you walk away and say, let's not do this, right? Like how can you think that?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, both of these projects, Cosmosis and telepathy tapes, they're very inspiring, right? I walked away from Cosmosis like super inspired, you know.
Thank
Even
you.
even being me and doing what I do, like I'm already in it, but it was like
Yeah.
reinvigorating for me. Like, there's other people here doing this work and, speaking the realness on it, and we're not stopping.
No,
And it's not going to slow down. So why, let's just do it already.
exactly. And I think that like Kelly has said it before, and I'll continue to say it. Like I think that if people see what we did with Cosmosis in terms of like basically being like, okay, I have a history in TV, she has a history in podcasts, and really trying to find something between the two, that really felt like a contemporary, new, fresh take, but also had the kind of like personal element, and it was not trying to like sand down all the edges. That was trying to take like a personal viewpoint and really write it large, because like all of these corporate shows that we see, they often try to like make a product that's going to feel about as good to everybody. And like in a lot of ways, that's like an impossible ask. And there are so many situations where you have to make the personal, by making something deeply personal, you make it universal because people respond to that. They see the authenticity, they see the personal, they can relate to it because they're a human being too. And like, if we can make more products that embrace frailty, that embrace personal experience, that embrace like a deeply personal viewpoint or a deeply unique viewpoint rather than this kind of like general understanding of lowest common denominator like
Yeah.
viewpoints or something like that, like, and that's one of the reasons I think why like podcasts in general are so dominant these days. Like I listen to, and you do, and like I'm sure like so much of your audience, we listen to podcasts. I listen to so many more hours of podcasts and this kind of content, and also like audiobooks, which is
Yeah.
also like
Yeah.
which is like a single perspective, generally speaking, than TV shows.
Yeah.
Like I'll watch some big TV shows, and I'm a TV director now. Like I love watching some good TV. I love some movies. Thanks. But like, unique personal stories are really what are reaching people these days. And and it's the way that people feel connected. And I think that there's a path forward here where we can take what we're beginning to learn from podcasts and be able to bridge this gap between TV shows and podcasts and make make a piece of art, make a
Yeah.
series, make a statement where people can really relate to each other on a grander level that feels unique and feels different and feels like the way that we want to feel. You know what I mean? That's not just like, what are they rebooting these days? Like, the next reboot of this or the next reboot of that.
Yeah.
That it can be something that somebody's feeling right now and they're trying to communicate to somebody else right now. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think, I hope everybody goes out and they watch Cosmosis and that they take something away from it. I mean, I think they will if they sit there and they listen and they watch, and they connect and engage with, the people that are talking and consider it, right? If they're new to the material, like I think they will. And again, even for people who have been in the field like me and other people, I think uh, you know, it's very inspiring and it definitely touches you on a personal level. So, I want to thank you so much for that. And I want to thank you for coming
Absolutely.
on.
Of course,
Um,
man.
and again,
Uh,
where can people get um, Cosmosis?
sure. Yeah. Folks can find Cosmosis, UFOs in a New Reality, season one, on Apple TV Plus, on Amazon Prime Video. Uh, Folks can also find episodes of it on YouTube and on Google Play currently. And we're looking at other international distribution that'll roll out later this month and into February. Very looking forward to that. And again, James Iandoli, it's your
Yeah.
TV debut in Cosmos' season one. And I'm so honored that you joined us for the show. Um, you're my brother. You're the gentle giant, uh, UFO Hulk,
Uh, yeah.
and it's so good to see you again. And thanks for bringing me onto the show again. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Likewise, and again, if you're an experiencer and you're listening to this, Jay is also the director of the Experiencer Group, so you might want to check that out. And I'm going to have the description to the docuseries and the Experiencer Group and everything in the description. And I hope to continue the cosmosis here on engaging the phenomenon, and hopefully have you and Kelly back on, and maybe some of the participants
Would love
that were
to.
in Cosmosis. I can have conversations with them on here too about it as well.
Would love that. Absolutely. Happy New Year to you and everyone in the audience. I still have my Christmas tree up. I
Me
I
too.
actually yeah,
Me
I
too.
actually left.
Yeah.
I was talking about whether I was going to take it down today before the show because I was like, oh, it's January and stuff like that. And I was like, you know what? More people need to see my cute little Christmas tree before it comes down.
Yeah.
So kept it up for right now, but it's coming down later tonight. So
Yeah.
anyway, wonderful to see you. Happy New Year, man.
Happy New
Uh,
Year. And I'll speak to you again soon, Jay.
Absolutely.
Take care.
You too.